Welcome to Inside Luxembourg Sport, the podcast where we talk about everything to do with high performance sport in Luxembourg. I am Fraser Carson. I'm joined by the Managing Director of the Luxembourg Institute of High Performance Sport, Alwin de Prins. I'm delighted to have you on the show, Alwin. Thanks for coming on. I'm going to jump into a couple of things. I'm going to get started on this because it pops up every time I see your emails come through. There's three little letters at the end of your name, and there's a little OLY in there, which represents an Olympian. And you're not just a single-time Olympian, it's 3 Olympics that you've gone to. I'm fascinated, just your experience, everything about the Olympics.
So yes, indeed, I participated 2000 in Sydney, 2004 in Athens, and 2008 in Beijing as a swimmer. Of course, a great experience. All the stories that you hear about Olympics, most of them are true. Not all, but most of them are true. It has shaped me as a human being. And every athlete will know that Olympics are always the final goal to reach. And in that way, I'm very satisfied and very proud that I have been able to participate 3 times. Yeah.
It's an amazing achievement. I'd say probably the favourite one was the Sydney Olympics. I worked in Sydney just on the build-up to them at one of the professional rugby teams over there. Saw the stadium, saw the whole city developing. It's known as the experience for the athletes and getting involved. Your first Olympics there, what was your initial experience walking into that village?
It was very impressive at first. Also seeing the pool and the huge stands that they had built for this pool, enormous. I've never seen so many people watching swimming. We're used to having a crowd of 100 people maybe, and now they were the building stands. I can't really remember. I think it was for 12 or 13,000 people.
They know they're going to win some gold medals there.
It was huge. It was very impressive. Also, the village was very nice. In fact, it was just like a normal neighborhood with normal houses. My teammate, Luc Dekker, and myself, we slept in the garage of the house. It was one of the rooms for the athletes. It was nice, but it's all about the atmosphere in the village, seeing all those athletes of different sports. It's brilliant. And of course, the Australians were so welcoming and nice. And then all the volunteers were absolutely amazing. It was a really nice experience.
And you keep going for 4 more years and you end up in Greece, which was the Centenary Olympics. It was a big experience again. How did that differ? Was it the same? Was it a bit more expectations on yourself? Or
the thing that I always find interesting is when people are asking which were the best Olympics or which one you enjoyed the most, you can never be objective without also looking at your own performance. So that's why Athens for me were great games because my performance was quite good. And in Sydney, even if the games were great, my performance was not that good. And that's why the Athens games, they always got quite a bad publicity. But for the athletes, it was okay. We still had great games. And it's the same for Beijing. The outside perspective is always very different than the perspective you have as an athlete.
Sure.
And regarding the way of approaching the 2004 Olympic Games, yes, so you have more experience, you're not as nervous anymore, you're also focusing better on your competitions because you're not looking at it with big eyes like the rabbit and the snake. You have a whole other level of confidence. Yes, the Athens Olympics were much better in that sense.
So because you've been there, you've experienced the kind of ideas before. Obviously, swimming's early in the program, so you're turning up the Olympic opening ceremonies and stuff. There's a lot of other stuff that goes on that you don't normally have in an event. So getting that little bit more experience, that's something that definitely helps you as an athlete.
Yes, but it's also one of the main things, and that's absolutely the same thing for athletes today, is that you know what is coming. You have really analyzed the program. You have seen the infrastructure. You have tried to analyze the atmosphere, etc., so that nothing is new when you're there. But then also, it is really important to not get swept away by the atmosphere before your race. That's why I've never participated in an opening ceremony, because swimming is always the first day. So there's, of course, the aspect of swimmers don't standing too much before their race. But there's also the other aspect that is just hindering your concentration. When a few hours before you had an opening ceremony, you will not be as focused as you should be. The whole experience as an athlete when you're going to Olympics is very different when you're looking at the days before and when you compare them to the days after.
Now about the actual event itself, in terms of, because in swimming you've got heats normally in the morning and then hopefully the semis or finals in the evening. How do you set yourself up for those kind of days? Obviously, you want to go pretty hard in the morning to qualify, but you still want to keep something in reserve.
I'm very happy where we are today as a Luxembourg sports world, where we have athletes that can be quite sure to go to the semifinals or the finals. In swimming, there are mostly no surprises. When you know you're not among the best 16 swimmers in the world, you know you will have to go all out for the series. Otherwise, you will never reach the semis. So in my perspective, it was really the weeks before and the days before in the preparation, you tried to train in a way that you could be at your fastest in the morning. So I really did everything to change my biorhythm in that way, that morning swimming would be best. And then mostly you only have one try. Let's be honest, most people, of course, they're looking at the medalists, they're looking at the finalists, the semifinalists. But the majority of the athletes that are there are not reaching the semifinals and are not reaching the finals. The majority has to go all out in the morning. And that's also the whole pressure you feel.
Yeah. What about then as well? Obviously, we talk about Olympics, you're building up. Yes, in swimming, there are European Championships, World Championships that happen on a more regular basis. But swimming, the Olympics are the pinnacle. So how do you pick yourself back up and try to target every 4 years and having that big event at the end?
That's a good question, because it is true that Europeans and World Championships are not comparable. Even if the level can be as high or higher, it's never seen as such a goal as the Olympics. That means also mentally, we are working so hard to get to that one point that you tend to have a dip after your race. So it's just focusing mentally so long on one race for 4 years, especially as, for example, I had in Sydney. If you're not satisfied with your race, it takes some time to get over it. Personally, but an individual thing for all athletes, I think that after the Olympics, you should take a break, a real break, one where you can reflect on your future, reflect on why you are doing your sport, what you're loving about it, because the decision to go again for another Olympic period is a heavy decision. Especially in the beginning, I thought that after Athens, I would end my career. And it was in my break after Athens that I really felt, no, I'm not finished yet. I still feel that I really want to, and I still love the sport. And also physically, I still felt capable of doing another 4 years. In your head, there's no turning back anymore. If you're beginning an Olympic period, you don't want to quit after 1 year or after 2 years.
Yeah, you have to make that commitment and you're going for it no matter what. That's the goal. It's interesting you do. I find it interesting from a psychological perspective about making that decision to retire or go on. I find it interesting that you mentioned trying to take some time off after a major event. Look at swimming in particular, they've gone into 3 or 4 of the major championships since the Olympics that were only less than a year ago. Yeah. It does seem crazy, the international stage having so many competitions.
But you saw Léon Marchand after the Olympics that in the beginning he wanted to do the races that came directly after the Olympics, and he didn't do them because just he was mentally not ready anymore. For me, it's very important that you give the athletes a break for them, that they can feel again that they really love their sport and that they're not just exhausted and going from race to race. The other thing that is interesting is that often when you look at the competitions a few months after the Olympics, most of the athletes, they take a break for at least 2 or 3 weeks. And sometimes they're really fast because they still have their shape from the Olympics, from the build-up and all the work they did for 4 years. Sometimes because of the pressure and difficult circumstances at the Olympics, they didn't get their performance out. A few months after that, you don't have the pressure anymore and you're still in the best shape of your life. Sometimes you see really good results.
Swimming's an interesting one because when they run the selection events for the major countries, the USA and Australia, there's quite a difference in kind of philosophy about whether I run them a long time before the event so the people can prep and peak at those major championships or Olympic Games, or do I do it very close to it and hope that they can sustain those kind of practice? What's your viewpoint on those?
That's a good question. I think it's different for every athlete because we had the possibility to qualify early for the Olympics. For most of them, I knew for nearly a year that I was qualified. And I'm not sure anymore that that's really a good thing. I think you tend to, I would not say lose focus, but your
intensity drops a bit, is it?
Yes. Like that? And also you tend to do things differently after that. And that's something that you shouldn't do. They always say it's brilliant if you qualify early because you have a lot of time to get into shape and prepare exactly as you want. And yes, that's totally true for some athletes. For some athletes, it works very good. You have this tranquility to grow into your shape for the Olympics. But on the other hand, you see it since years and years that especially the US athletes, they always qualify very late for the Olympics and mostly they are still performing very good. So normally you have less surprises. If someone qualified a year ago, it would be totally normal that the performance is not the same as it was back then. In an optimal case, it would be better than before, but there's also the athletes that just lose their form, lose their shape in this year. Mentally, it is not as easy as it seems to qualify really early. On a physical level, you're bound to have more surprises if you qualify really early. And if you qualify really late, the one thing that I don't think is really positive is those that are in sports where you try to qualify over a longer period of time. And those that have to try to get the qualifying standard like a few weeks before the Olympics and they're still traveling everywhere, they're trying and retrying. And mentally, that is so exhausting that I don't think that's a good preparation for the main event.
One final question about the Olympics. Of the 3 Olympics, who was the biggest star you met in the Olympic Village? Or the big one that stood out for you?
There were a lot of them. Probably the tennis players. But there is maybe one nice anecdote. At the time, you still had, in the middle of a village, there's this huge restaurant for 11 or 12,000 people. The main sponsor of the Olympics was McDonald's. When I was finished with my race, then you can eat and eat whatever you want. So I was queuing for the McDonald's just to eat something else. And then just the person standing in front of me was a tiny person. And I thought, surely that's also a person that has already finished his or her race. I didn't see anything about who it was or whatever. I just saw it. I wasn't really paying attention. And then suddenly the person turned around and it was Haile Gebrselassie, just exchanged a few words. He's not that fluent in English, but it was great. It was really great and really funny.
I was one of the superstars of the track as well. I know I've spoken to a number of people in the Olympics and they always say that the queue for the McDonald's is always the longest in the Olympic Village. Yeah. It's a strange one.
But it gets longer and longer. Right. So the first day it's really short and after 2 weeks it's like 100 meters long. Yeah.
I could talk about the Olympics all day, but let's move on to your role at the moment. So you are currently the managing director of LIHPS. Mm-hmm. Give me a bit about how you go from being a swimmer to this role. What was your kind of trajectory?
Yes, I think the interesting thing was I became, so already during my career, I studied business administration, economics, business administration, such kind of thing. And then after that, after my career, I began a totally normal, let's say, Luxembourgish life by working at the bank, which was nice. But at that time, I also felt that I wanted to be connected to sports again. So I became a member of the board of directors of the Olympic Committee. The Olympic Committee had the project of finally building a high-performance center in Luxembourg. Like every country in Europe already had a high-performance center. And it's really something that was absolutely missing in Luxembourg. And that's how I got involved in the idea. And then at a later stage, when it was founded in December of 2017, they were looking for a director. And of course, you are not really looking for a sports scientist, even if a sports scientist could have been brilliant. But more important for such a role is also to have some management experience. Yeah. And that's why I think they came to me, because it was also, I had, of course, the high-performance sports experience, but I especially also had the management experience. Yeah. And that's how I got into this role.
So do you have a normal day? If I ask you what a normal day in your role is?
I think it's not as spectacular as some people would hope. As a director, you're more, let's say, managing the parts, administration, finance, etc., etc. But I do, so let's say most is office work, but I try to be as much as I can at the COC here at the Sportfabrik, seeing how our sports scientists, SNC, coaches, RTS experts or whatever are working is really important for me to understand how the structure works, how we could further develop it, what is missing, what their feedback is. Being there and listening to the experts, listening to the athletes is a really important part of the work.
Making decisions based on all that feedback about how you drive the direction of an institute like this.
Yes, absolutely. And the most important are always the athletes and the coaches. Their feedback is invaluable.
At the moment, at the time of recording, we're at a really exciting period of Luxembourg sport. Lunek's very own Patricia van der Werkens had 2 fantastic results, winning medals in international competitions at the European and World Indoors. And that must make your job a little bit easier when you're getting that kind of publicity, does it?
So firstly, Patricia is, of course, a great athlete. So it's amazing how she made her career in Luxembourg with her same coach, who is a coach that has also had a wonderful development also as a coach. I think we're all very proud of her results. But it is important to say that it's always the results of the athletes. I would never say it's because of the Olympic Committee or whatever that she is where she is. It's her performance and, of course, with the help of her coach. We as LIHPS, we do try to accompany her as good as we can. That may be equipment, that may be scientific expertise, that may be also discussions with her coach on what he could integrate in training. It's also important that he is the one coordinating everything. We're helping. We're trying to give as much as support as we can. But that's one of our main principles, that we are providing services, but the coach is always the one that is the responsible person and is responsible for his or her athlete.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I was saying, we've actually got quite a few really good athletes coming through in track and field. Some triathletes are starting to compete at international level. How does that change in terms of your philosophy about developing athletes, where you focus, what's the needs, what's the requirements? Does it change how you think about the development of the sport?
I think the good development of athletes in the last years is about a common understanding that you need to build a circle of experts around an athlete. And it's not only about their physical training. We have a lot of services that are focused on performance, that are focused on their health, that are focused on their dual career. And one of the most important things is that all these experts that we provide for the athlete, that they are really working together, that they communicate and they see the athlete in a holistic way. So when we provide services, that they are uniquely, let's say, built for the athlete, and that these experts, that they talk to each other to be sure that if one of them is providing, I don't know, let's say S&C services, then it's of course absolutely essential that he is in constant contact, I don't know, with the nutritionist, for example. Or that if an athlete is talking about his or her dual career, and one is seeing that there are also psychological aspects where we should talk about, that you get them in contact with a sports psychologist. All these kinds of accompanying measures, they have to be in a common philosophy. They have to be with experts that you really trust. And I think when you're able to build this team around an athlete, the athlete will really benefit and have less stress than athletes that have to look for them everywhere. And especially if as an athlete, you are just building your team, but you have no possibility of connecting the team, then it gets really difficult, because if you're looking for a nutritionist and after that there is no possibility to really integrate this nutritionist in your team because maybe, I don't know, nutritionist has an own job and cannot be there the whole time, then it gets difficult. So this whole sense of having a team that is really working together for the athlete, I think that is really essential.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to having that holistic approach. And I think a lot of times in elite sport, particularly, we forget that the athletes are people as well. And they've got a whole lot of other stuff potentially going on and stuff they have to deal with and expectations as well. So having that communication between the staff that are involved is really important. One of the big debates is always in development of sport and getting athletes to high performance level is, where do we do the investment? We'd like to have investment money going everywhere. But probably to simplify debate, we invest everything at the top level, elite level athletes, and then we get them as role models to get people to want to aspire to be them. Or the other option is that we invest in the development, the grassroots, we get the structures right, and then we hope to progress kind of athletes through. What's your take on these different approaches, or how you think about it?
Even if I am working in elite sports, I'm absolutely convinced that in a lot of ways, when accompanying athlete, we should start earlier, because when athletes have the level to work with LIHPS, we can try to look for the last 1 or 2%, but we will not be able to change things that have not been done when they were younger. I think it's really important that you try to invest in the whole way of an athlete. It's, of course, starts with having the necessary structures in a society that helps children to have some kind of culture of moving their body, doing sports, but also just to be active. I think that is absolutely essential, and you see it in nearly every great nation in sports, that children are really active in their daily lives. That is an important part of investment, to get the possibilities to people in their normal lives when the children are still small, give all the opportunities to be active. The club life is really important. Investing in sporting clubs and the possibilities they have to get good coaches is also absolutely essential. Good coaching starts at a young level. Yeah. And then when they are getting to a federation level, it is important to see that even we as an institute that is about high performance sports, when the athletes are still, let's say, developing high performance athletes, when they're still quite young, you tend to deliver your services more to the federation as a federation centered approach, so that they can accompany the athlete. And when they're getting older and older, you try to having the services getting more and more individual. So it will grow from a federation centered approach to an athlete centered approach. To answer your question, investment should go to all levels of development of an athlete, on an elite level and on infrastructure level, we have made large progresses over the last year. Also, if you see the development of LIHPS, if you see where we were in 2018 and if you see where we are now, it's a huge difference. But there's still a real gap if you compare it to some other countries. We're trying to fill this gap, but there's still a need for more growth. There is still a need for more experts. There's especially a need for more experts that are specialists in some sports. So all these investments, they are necessary. And on a personal note, I think that we are still developing great infrastructure, and it is important to have this, but one should never forget that besides the great infrastructure, you also need the expertise, you need the human resources. That is something so essential that it must be part of the planning when you plan great infrastructure, that you also plan the human resources that go with it.
Yeah, definitely. You said a couple of interesting things I'd like to pick up on. You're talking about comparing with other countries, and it's probably not realistic for Luxembourg to compare itself with our neighbours. We're not going to compete with Germany and France in terms of budgets and those kind of things. So who do you potentially look to as as kind of role models to show us how we could potentially look in developing sport in this country, particularly at a high performance level?
Even if we will never be as good as some other countries, we do look to how they're doing it. One of our main inspirations when we began was Norway, which is still one of the greatest sport nations in the world, especially, of course, if you look at winter sports, but also in summer sports, they're really good. And an inspiration that we maybe do not know as good as European countries, but let's say when you compare size to the size of the country with the results is, of course, New Zealand, which is just incredible how the results they get out of such a small population. If you ask what are the main partners of LIHPS, we have a great collaboration with France, with INSEP. And then there are a lot of countries that we are visiting, that we are trying to understand. Countries like the Netherlands, Denmark. So the countries in Europe that have great facilities for their athletes, but they also have a great sports culture. Belgium is also one of the ones we're looking at because they really had an impressive development also in the last year. So countries like the Netherlands, they've always been good, but Belgium really has a very positive evolution. So that's also something we're looking at. How are they doing it?
You talk about this culture of sport, and you mentioned New Zealand. The other one that pops up to me all the time is Ireland coming through, and they just have started to develop athletes that are winning medals or competing at the highest levels. I know there's been huge investments of funds in these kind of countries, but there is also that, as you mentioned, that culture that we go out, we're really invested in sport. I've probably been here in Luxembourg for about 5 years. I don't quite see it as much here. I see it starting to develop, but do you see more of a push, particularly young people wanting to get involved in sport and seeing sport as a career or a way to live life?
And I think we have some factors in Luxembourg that are not easy. And some of the things, I'll just give an example. I think for sporting clubs, it is not really easy how we as a Luxembourg society, how we work, because this kind of village life is not really existing anymore. So people are wandering around the country, which creates the situation that we have less and less people helping in clubs, or that you have this atmosphere in a club that everyone is pushing in the same direction. The Luxembourgers are also in this unique position that they have to try to create the sport culture and combine it with the specifics of a small country where only half or maybe even less of people can compete for Luxembourg. So that's also something that you have to take in consideration. This sport culture is still something that we have to work on. I see a lot of good initiatives to get people moving more, to get children into clubs, etc. I've seen a lot of good initiatives in the last months and years. But yeah, there's still a lot of way to make. Just to give another example, the Luxembourg national team in football, I mean, they're getting better and better results. And one must be really honest, they had a great evolution. And what I also find quite fascinating in Luxembourg, that is, like now we're already used to these good results. If you look like 20 years back, it was sensational if we could beat one of the smaller countries. Now we played 1-0 against Sweden a few days ago, and if everyone thinks it's normal, I would like to sometimes have more of a mentality in Luxembourg where we really know how small we are and that we really respect our athletes and push them further and further without asking of them to be to have the same evolution as US athletes.
Is that something that we should potentially look at in this country, focusing on specific sports where you need less numbers to reach the high levels? Obviously, we talk about football. You need a squad of 22, 25, at least at that level. That's a large number of people, as opposed to, we've talked about track and field, we've talked about triathlon, we've talked about maybe cycling, where you need just a small handful that can get you into those top level competitions. Is that something to consider?
But you always see the exceptions, like the Icelandic handball team or the Icelandic football team. And yes, I do think that at some level you have to be realistic in that sense, that it will always be much more difficult for sports where you need large teams. It will always be much more difficult to reach the European or world level than individual athletes, where we have the possibility to really pick the most talented ones and to accompany them as good as we can. But still, I think that you see that also in team sports, great development. At one point, there will be some kind of politics in Luxembourg, as it's done in the UK, where they tend to focus on some sports more than others. That is something I think the Olympic Committee should look into. But at the other hand, I really respect that we're not giving up in team sports, because they're now the women's basketball team, for example, had great results. Of course, the male football team. There are so many teams that are still reaching a very respected international level that yes, of course, we have to be as smart as possible where we invest money, where we invest our human resources, etc. But that doesn't mean that good coaches and a good environment, etc., cannot help to get team sports to a real good level.
Yeah. And do we do anything on transfer of athletes? So we recognise physiologically athletes might be really good in one sport, but maybe suited a little bit better than other. The UK did a lot with cycling and rowing, for example. Is there any kind of systems like that in place here in Luxembourg?
No, other than trying to talk to athletes on an individual initiative, because it's seen by experts, by coaches, etc., that a person would be maybe more suited for another sport. But there's no organized system where we would look for athletes for a specific sport, which could be really useful. In Luxembourg, it is difficult to have big approaches for sports development because the population is so small that you mostly work with the talents that pop up in different sports. It's very difficult to have a long-term strategy on a sport if the number of athletes you're working with is so small. That's why you tend to adapt to the talents that you have and that pop up. But again, I still think that it's important to have some sports that you are focusing on, just because if you already focus on sports that are very popular in Luxembourg, you could try to get very specific expertise for them in Luxembourg. You could try to have sports scientists that have a very deep expertise in this sport, which I think would be important for the future. Then now we're really talking on an elite level.
You've mentioned this a few times, and it warms my heart a little bit at LUNEX and trying to educate sport and exercise science students. We have a lot of students who want to go into coaching, strength and conditioning, the wider sport workforce. And you've mentioned how important that is to getting good quality coaches. How do we go about improving those people that are helping, whether that's coaching at young levels or at the highest level?
At LIHPS, we are huge fans of continuing education. We think it's extremely important to see how people work abroad, to learn from other athletes, from other coaches, to go to congresses, to go to every kind of continuous education, etc. So that is one part that is important. International exchange is also something that could really help. If you're looking at coach education, there's the INAPS in Luxembourg, the institute responsible for that. Their role is really important because they're really at the focus and at the start and at the base of all the needs that the Luxembourg sports world has in regarding education of coaches. And of course, when we're looking at LUNEX, it's maybe not exactly the same people we're looking at as the INAPS, but also for LUNEX, I think it's absolutely the same thing. It is important to tell coaches, sports scientists, SNC coaches and whatever, that their education is not finished when they're coming out of university. That then it just starts. You just need to read your scientific articles. You need to be always on the last level of scientific advancement.
I always tell our students to look at opportunities. Whenever opportunities arise, take those and see how much experience that you can get.
Yeah.
And particularly when you're talking working in high performance sport, it's a really unique workplace as well. It's not a regular 9-to-5 job in a lot of cases. There's a lot of extra hours, whether that's weekends, your early mornings, late nights. Not necessarily the same kind of rewards financially for it as well. But as I said, we've talked about cultures in other countries. There's lots of people want to get into these kind of roles. So what kind of advice would you be giving to younger people thinking, I'd like to get involved in sport and to stay involved in sport for a long period of time is my job?
So you mean when they really want to go into elite sports?
Working in that, if I want to go, and I mightn't be a good enough athlete to get to the Olympics, but maybe I can go as a coach.
I think that For people that want to become a coach or a sports scientist, the most important thing to know is that it will never be a 9-to-5 job. But if you are someone that is enthusiastic about sports, if you are someone that thinks that it's great to see athletes develop and reach their own goals, there's nothing comparable. The whole emotion that goes with it, the passion you have for the sport. If you have this passion and if you're really looking for a job that will be rewarding until the end of your work life, I think there's nothing greater than sport. You have to understand that if you want to have such a life, then it will never be a 9-to-5 job, but it will be extremely rewarding, and it will be something you will never stop to be passionate about, I think.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And it's a way of just getting in there. And you said you experience the highs, you experience the lows, and the great opportunities in different ways, but you need to be able to adapt quickly, kind of work through different scenarios that mightn't be all that comfortable at the time, but do help you to grow. Do that. I've been in jobs myself where it hasn't been much fun when you're losing all the time, but when you're winning, it's pretty exciting, and it really gets you going.
Even if you're losing for a long period, the wins after that are even more rewarding. It's something that will never get boring.
We've talked about a lot of different concepts today. I could keep on going for a longer period of time. One final question. How do we go about creating that high-performance sport culture in Luxembourg? What would be, if you had an open checkbook or a free to do whatever you want, what would be some of the maybe main idea or a couple of ideas you can get all our Luxembourg athletes competing at that elite level?
That's a difficult one. I think because you were asking about culture, I think it mostly starts with great coaches. That is something I would always open my checkbook for, because great coaches are always at the beginning. If you're looking at elite sports, it used to be that you always told young athletes that if they want to be the best, they will have a hard life and they will suffer. I would like society to see sports much more as a positive thing, and also for elite athletes, most of them, they really enjoy their lives. It is a hard life in some aspects, but it's about training. But everything that goes with it is great. And to create this kind of positive vibe when you're looking at sports, that is something that everyone along the way an athlete develops has to contribute to. So we're talking great teachers, great sports teachers. We're talking about great coaches. We're talking about, on an elite level, all the necessary experts that you need to get the athletes to the level he or she wants. And then it's the whole how you sell sports, because I think it's great how people are enjoying the results of Patricia van der Weken, but it's also a part of education that you're trying to support athletes no matter what, that you're proud of your country, that you're proud of your athletes, and then you will really begin to push them forward. But now, if you say, because you asked about the open checkbook, it's really necessary to invest in great experts, in great expertise all along the way that an athlete makes. Beginning from a young age until the elite level, you have to invest a lot, and not only in performance, but also in the health of the athlete and the life that the athlete has besides her sport. If you have all the means necessary, you will see the result. I think there is already coming, but you will really see the result. You created a positive atmosphere around sports. I think then it will be great at one point.
I 100% agree with you. I really appreciate your time today coming on. We see, as I said, Luxembourg's athletes developing and growing, and it's wonderful to see, and we're starting to create that culture, and hopefully we see more and more of it. And the job that you do, the whole of your team there at LIHPS, is a big part of that. So thank you for sharing your views.
Thank you.